It's 16 o'clock, and this is the news on Freedom. Hello, my name is Mikhail Baranov, and I'll tell you about the important events of this Friday. 128 drones attacked Ukraine last night. About 90 of them were Shahids, according to the Ukrainian Air Force. The defenders of Ukraine's skies neutralized more than 70 Russian drones. Drone strikes were recorded at 10 locations. 19 settlements in the Kharkiv region were left without power due to the overnight Russian attack. 19 settlements in the Kharkiv region remain without electricity. The drone strikes targeted critical infrastructure in the region. Fires broke out at several locations. Efforts to eliminate the consequences are ongoing. Fortunately, there were no casualties or injuries. Russian occupiers shelled Kharkiv again. A series of powerful explosions rocked the city. In the middle of the workday, transport and civilian enterprises were attacked. At this time, there are reports of 10 people injured. One of them is in serious condition. Doctors are fighting for his life. More than 20 vehicles were also damaged. A fire broke out at one of the locations.
At exactly 11 a.m.,
the enemy used 5 KAVs. All of them landed in the city's industrial district. One of them struck the grounds of a transportation company that handles food deliveries. At that time, there were people there, employees at work. As for the other impact site, 4 KAVs hit a civilian enterprise. Fortunately, there were no consequences there, but we do have 2 damaged apartment buildings. The blast wave shattered windows there.
In the morning, the Russian army shelled residential neighborhoods in Kherson with rocket artillery. 2 people were killed, more than 20 were injured, including 3 children. 36 private homes and 15 apartment buildings were destroyed. More details about the aftermath of the attack are in our report.
The Russian army attacked Kherson with multiple rocket launchers. The strikes hit a residential neighborhood, killing 2 people. Among the injured is a 16-year-old boy. A Russian shell hit his room directly. The teenager suffered a blast injury, shrapnel wounds, and a concussion. He was taken to the hospital in moderate condition.
Today, a cluster munition landed in my room. I was already awake and folding up the sofa. The impact hit the right side. My whole right side hurts, my arm, my leg. I have a concussion in my right ear.
Because of the Russian shelling, about 30 private homes were damaged. Some of them were almost completely destroyed.
It hit once and then a second time. Maybe it wasn't meant for here. The first time it hit here, and the second time it was shrapnel. Before that, a drone was flying around. I was outside having coffee and I heard their buzzing, so I ran away. And at that moment, I heard something falling because I had already heard that at my mom's place before. And then the grads started coming. Where did they hit? Well, they hit here, maybe closer, but it seemed to me that was the second one. Well, they came one after another, at least 5 of them for sure.
About 15 apartment buildings were also damaged. Fires broke out in some of the apartments.
There was one here, one on that side, but one of them exploded up high, like a charge in the air.
Trolleybuses and a minibus also came under Russian shelling. The driver of the electric transport was injured. The head of the local Akapashta branch was killed in the minibus. She was on her way to work when the city was hit by Grad rockets. In total, more than 20 people were affected by the Russian morning attack on Kherson. Among them were 3 children. Sania Sidinskaya for Freedom TV channel.
The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine recorded 120 combat clashes along the entire front line over the past day. In the North Slobozansky, Kursk, as well as Kramatorsk and Guliapol directions, the enemy did not conduct assault operations. The situation remains difficult but under control in 6 sectors of the front. Specifically, in the Lyman, southern Slobozansky, Konstantinovka, Slavyansk, and Alexandrovka directions. The Russians made the most attempts, 39 unsuccessful efforts, to break through the Ukrainian defenses at the Pokrovsk bridgehead.
In the Pokrovsk direction, the 51st Army of the Russian Federation, which was operating in the north, had the main objective of encircling Pokrovsk from the north, targeting the Pokrovsk-Myrnograd agglomeration from the north, with the aim of cutting off the road to Dobropilya. In order to encircle Pokrovsk from the north and effectively close the ring around the city, in fact, this plan has failed. The fighting there is intense, but it's clear that the Russians will not achieve these objectives.
The total combat losses of the Russian Federation since the start of the full-scale war have already exceeded 1,135,000 soldiers. Of these, 910 occupiers were eliminated in the past 24 hours, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Also, according to their data, during the day a Russian tank, 5 armored combat vehicles, and more than 30 artillery pieces were destroyed, as well as 1 multiple rocket launcher system and over 120 units of enemy automotive equipment. Today in London, a meeting of the Coalition of the Willing will take place, and world leaders are gathering to discuss increasing pressure on Russia, as well as ways to strengthen Ukraine's position. President Zelensky has already arrived in the United Kingdom and met with King Charles III. After that, the head of the Ukrainian state went to Downing Street, where he held talks with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. In addition, meetings are scheduled with Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen and her Dutch counterpart Dick Schoof, as well as with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. According to the British government, Keir Starmer will urge coalition members who want to remove Russian oil and gas from the global market to finalize work on Russia's frozen assets and provide Ukraine with long-range weapons.
I think this week we will be able to finish work with the Russian oligarchs. Huge steps forward have already been made. I think we can do much more in terms of capabilities, especially long-term and long-range ones. And, of course, regarding the important work of the coalition, for those who are willing.
I agree with you that Putin is not showing any intention to stop the war, and is actually beginning steps that push us toward the humanitarian catastrophe he wants to create this winter. These are, of course, attacks on energy systems, on gas and water supplies. And we are grateful to you that we have not been alone in this situation since the very beginning of the war. But now, more than ever, this is especially important.
Germany's Minister of Economy and Energy, Katharina Reich, arrived in Kiev on an unannounced visit. The purpose of the trip is to help Ukraine restore its energy infrastructure after Russian strikes. Reich promised that Berlin would allocate more funds and make every effort to ensure that the necessary equipment arrives in Ukraine on time. We're talking about transformers, substations, and compressors for gas compression. The minister emphasized the importance of supporting Ukrainians ahead of winter, amid intensified Russian attacks.
We will help restore the energy infrastructure and replace the equipment that has been put out of commission. We have the tools for this. However, I will be stepping up their use together with my working group, both financially and procedurally, in close cooperation with German and Ukrainian energy suppliers.
Chinese state-owned companies have suspended purchases of Russian oil after the United States imposed sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil. Reuters reports this. Indian refineries are also planning to make a similar decision, the agency reports. Every day, Beijing received about 1.5 million barrels of oil from the Russian Federation by sea. Most of it was consumed by private refineries, and they too are likely to suspend purchases. Larissa Petruk will tell you more in detail.
Europe welcomes the new American sanctions. The United States has imposed restrictions on 2 Russian oil giants, Rosneft and Lukoil, as well as on more than 30 of their subsidiaries. This came after preparations for a meeting between the U.S. president and the Kremlin dictator were halted. Donald Trump's disappointment with the Kremlin's policies has reached new heights, a source in Washington told journalists, according to Axios. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen called the American sanctions a big positive. Latvian President Edgars Rinkēvičs noted that the restrictions are a very timely and necessary step. And British Prime Minister Keir Starmer reminded everyone that last week, Britain had already imposed sanctions on Russia's two largest oil companies, which are funding Putin's war machine. Putin's.
Donald Trump realized that peaceful cooperation with an aggressive Putin is impossible. And I should also clarify that all the populists across Europe who are asking us to make more diplomatic efforts to achieve peace are clearly wrong, because Putin is not interested in creating peace. There will be no Budapest Peace Summit. But now there are Donald Trump sanctions against Putin. This is the political reality, and it means that we Europeans, together with the Americans and Ukrainians, are now stronger in defending our European way of life.
This is a clear signal from both sides of the Atlantic that we will continue to exert collective pressure on the aggressor. Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, on social network X.
Russia will most likely lose one of its main oil buyers. Executives of Indian oil refineries have stated that the new sanctions make deliveries impossible. Bloomberg reports this. Until recently, New Delhi remained the largest buyer of seaborne oil from the Federation. Deliveries increased several times over after the start of the full-scale war against Ukraine, when the West refused to cooperate with the aggressor.
This year, India took 36% of its oil imports from Russia, which is a serious irritant for President Donald Trump and an obstacle to trade negotiations, after punitive tariffs came into effect in August. These negotiations are at a critical point, although Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi intends to skip the regional summit in Kuala Lumpur next week, where he was expected to meet with his American counterpart, Bloomberg reports.
Immediately after the White House announced its decision to impose sanctions, Brent crude oil prices rose by almost 4%, reaching $65 per barrel. Most experts agree that this is the first financial restriction against Russia during the second term. A warning shot from Trump. Their main goal is to force Putin to come to the negotiating table. After all, Rosneft and Lukoil are giants of Russian oil production. They account for more than half of the oil output in the Federation. Against the backdrop of U.S. sanctions, the company's shares have already plummeted. In just one day, Lukoil's stock price dropped by almost 5.5%. Rosneft's fell by up to 4%.
Despite the decrease in oil sales revenue, which currently makes up about 30% of Russia's budget income, a significant amount, this is unlikely to radically change Putin's calculations, simply because he has been dealing with this problem for a long time already. At the same time, the sanctions could successfully limit the resources available to Putin to continue this war. Most of the budget revenue is used to finance Russia's military-industrial complex. The Trump administration is finally sending a very important signal to other buyers, such as clients and all sorts of agents who continue to do business with Russia, that there could be serious consequences.
The effectiveness of American restrictions will depend on how consistent Washington's policy is, according to former senior State Department official Edward Fishman. And given the successful drone attacks on Russian oil infrastructure, these sanctions increase the likelihood of serious disruptions in oil production and the shutdown of Russian refineries.
The impact of American sanctions on Russia can be assessed in about 6 months. This is how U.S. President Donald Trump responded to Putin's bravado about the Russian economy supposedly not being significantly affected by the restrictions imposed by the White House.
I'm glad you think so. That's good. I'll let you know in 6 months. Let's see how these sanctions work out.
Putin also stated that he would not cease military actions in Ukraine, despite the new U.S. sanctions. And he threatened, in his words, a staggering response to any possible Tomahawk cruise missile strikes on Russian Federation territory. Additionally, commenting on the U.S. president's cancellation of the summit in Budapest, the Kremlin chief said that Trump, so to speak, decided to postpone the meeting. Let me remind you, the introduction of sanctions, which affected Russia's largest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, as well as the decision to lift restrictions on long-range strikes on Russia with Western weapons, were explained in Washington by Moscow's lack of interest in ending the war against Ukraine.
Subscribe to The Gaze and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.